Can you imagine starting a season knowing that you are already defeated? What would you do if the FIA itself authorized a technical interpretation that gives your rival an advantage of up to 4/10 per lap before the championship begins? Today, we unravel the technical scandal that has unleashed chaos at Maranello and outrage at Mercedes, and that could mark the beginning of a new golden era or the end of sporting credibility in Formula One. The paddock was not prepared for this. The 2026 season hasn't started yet, and yet the tension is so thick you could cut it with a scalpel. Before the first traffic light goes out, Formula One is already experiencing what many consider an institutional crisis disguised as technical progress. And the epicenter of this earthquake has a name and surname: the interpretation of the compression ratio in the new hybrid power units. What seemed like a regulatory transition towards a more efficient and sustainable era has mutated into a deep rift between three of the most influential manufacturers in the championship and the FIA itself. At the heart of the storm lies a silent but deadly technical advantage. Mercedes and Red Bull powertrains, two structures with a proven track record of exploiting regulatory loopholes, have developed power units by 2026 that manage to achieve compression ratios higher than permitted, but do so completely legally. How is it possible? The key is in a detail of the technical regulations that at first glance seems innocuous. Compression ratio measurements must be made under static conditions and at room temperature. A phrase that sounds technical, but hides a gold mine for engineers who know how to read between the lines. Mercedes didn't just read between the lines. He wrote his future between those lines. During actual engine operation on the track, internal temperatures can reach 120 degrees Celsius, causing considerable thermal expansion in metal components. If the materials used are specifically designed to expand under heat, the combustion chamber volume can be reduced enough to increase the effective compression ratio significantly. In simple terms, the engine complies with the regulations when it is cold and dismantled in the garage, but it transforms into a much more powerful beast when it warms up during the race. And the worst thing for Ferrari, Honda, and Audi is not just the engineering behind the stunt, but the fact that the FIA was fully aware of this strategy from the beginning. The most respected sources in the paddock, including the race and automotor UND Sport, confirmed that Mercedes maintained a constant dialogue with the federation during the development of its unit. There was no deception, there was no concealment. There was coordination, transparency, green light. A situation that recalls with disturbing similarity the hegemony that Mercedes built since 2014, when they also took advantage of a particular interpretation of hybrid maps to dominate a regulation for almost a decade. And that's where the real outrage is born. Because while Mercedes was moving forward with a validated design, Ferrari and company were operating under the mistaken assumption that the new 16:1 limit was a hard, unbreakable cap. Suddenly, the development of its power units is limited by a much narrower framework. In his view, the spirit of the regulation has been violated. And it is not a minor complaint. In an environment as millimetric as modern Formula One, a difference of 0.3 to 0.4 seconds per lap, the most conservative estimate of the advantage, represents a competitive catastrophe. For Ferrari engineers who have worked for years perfecting their combustion system, discovering that their main rivals have found an officially validated shortcut is equivalent to starting the season at an irreversible disadvantage. For the managers, it is a political crisis. The FIA has chosen a side. And for the drivers, especially figures like Lewis Hamilton, who has just landed in Maranello with very high expectations, the perception is clear. This battle for the 2026 championship may be decided before the first stint in Barcelona. Behind the closed doors of the motorhomes, the conversations are high voltage. The situation has escalated to such a point that there is even talk of a possible legal appeal to the International Court of Appeals. But beyond the formal disputes, the damage has already been done. The regulatory balance, that fragile pact that allows 10 teams to compete under supposedly fair conditions, has been broken. And with it, the hope of many that the new 2026 cycle would be a real competitive restart. Most alarmingly, this situation could have been avoided if the FIA had adjusted its verification procedures to reflect actual race conditions. But he didn't do it. It won't. And in that decision lies the real bomb. Mercedes has been authorized, even encouraged, to build a power unit that escapes conventional limits, without breaking any rules. The paddock knows it. And that's why, when the engines start in the first race of the year, it won't just be a competition between single-seaters. It will be a political statement, an ideological battle, and perhaps the start of a war that will change the rules of the game again. Because in Formula One, as in any war, whoever controls the interpretation controls destiny. The first reactions were immediate. As soon as the FIA issued its brief statement confirming that the measurement of the compression ratio must be done in static conditions at room temperature, Mercedes' technical interpretation stopped being a paddock rumor and became an official truth. But that apparent neutrality, that bureaucratic and distant tone, was perceived by many as a sentence. And Ferrari, along with Honda and Audi, reacted as if it had received an institutional slap. The most serious thing is that Mercedes not only applied a creative solution, but did so after maintaining constant communication with regulators. Reports such as those published by the race revealed that there was dialogue, there was technical exchange, and there was an early green light. That is, while Ferrari was building its power unit on a literal interpretation of the regulations, Mercedes had already legally validated an expanded interpretation. This was not an act of covert rebellion. It was an institutionalized operation. The most immediate comparison that many in the paddock have been quick to make is with the case of the FRIC suspensions in 2014 or with the blown diffusers of 2010, perfectly legal systems, until they became too effective, and then the FIA banned them. But in this case, the feeling is different. There is no hidden helper system or pop-up behavior here. There is an explicit line in the regulation Article C 5.4.3 and a deliberate omission of how to measure the engine in real operating conditions. Why didn't the FIA update its methods after reducing the permitted ratio from 18:1 to 16:1? Why didn't you establish a control that would reflect thermal expansion during track use? The omission is so significant that many interpret it as a hidden political concession. Ferrari, Honda, and Audi have then resorted to their only available weapon, Article C 1.5. This section clearly states that all cars must comply with the regulations at all times during a competition, not just during inspections. It is a clause designed to avoid temporary cheats, active modifications, or devices that change behavior during the race. And in its strictest reading, an engine that operates at 18:1 while registered and approved as 16:1 is violating that principle. But the FIA has an answer. The ratio does not actively change, there is no moving mechanism, there is no structural alteration with fraudulent intent. Everything happens as a result of physics, heat, the natural expansion of materials. The Federation hides itself in this legal vacuum. And that vacuum is what has unleashed the war. Internally, the conflict has generated fissures even within the teams themselves. Some Audi engineers have questioned whether it was a mistake to rely so much on the literality of the regulation. At Honda, frustration is mixed with resignation. The Japanese, traditionally more conservative, would never have explored such a blurred edge of the norm. And at Ferrari, the anger runs deeper. Because not only do they feel deceived, but they suspect that this creative interpretation was favored by a network of influence that has been benefiting Mercedes for years. Meanwhile, the FIA is at a dangerous crossroads. If it decides to modify the regulations now, it will be exposed for having allowed one or more teams to build their engines under a framework that will later be invalidated. But if it does nothing, it enshrines a competitive gap that threatens to ruin the show for years. And the most worrying thing, it leaves the door open for other teams in the future to start designing thinking not about performance, but about how to navigate the regulations as a system of logical traps. When a technical interpretation threatens to define the course of 5 seasons, the consequences are not limited to the sporting level. The compression ratio controversy is not just a performance issue. It is a fracture in the political, economic, and strategic balance of Formula One. Because if the recent history of the championship has shown anything, it is that when an advantage like this crystallizes on the track, there is no turning back. What Ferrari is attempting now is, in essence, a technical counterinsurgency operation. They are not simply seeking to equal Mercedes' advantage, but rather to adapt to a new paradigm that they did not design, did not promote, and that they consider unfair. And on that path, the possibility of mechanical failure increases exponentially. Hotter engines, more delicate materials, more aggressive thermal cycles. All under the pressure of having to give immediate results. Because if action is not taken in the first half of the championship, the titles could be sealed before the summer. The other major consequence of this conflict is the change in behavior of the rest of the teams. Honda, for example, has been publicly much more cautious. But behind closed doors it has already requested an urgent review of its designs to evaluate whether they can incorporate the same thermal expansion strategy without breaking its reliability ecosystem. Audi, which is just beginning its full integration cycle with Sauber, faces the worst possible scenario, building from scratch in an environment where rivals already play with political and technical advantage. The FIA has made it clear that it does not plan to intervene for now. But should I? Should a regulatory body remain faithful to the letter of the regulation even if this means breaking the competitive balance? Or do you have an ethical responsibility to protect the spirit of sportsmanship, even if that means modifying your own procedures midstream? Let me know in the comments what you think of all this.